Joining me now to talk all about this is Illinois Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley, who is the co-chair of the House Ukraine Caucus. So it's a good time to talk to him. I know I was joking that you're on your spring break, but I know you're very busy with your constituent services there, sir, so I appreciate you giving us some time. Let's talk about when you get back from recess. The House could be looking at another motion to vacate. Some Republicans are upset with Speaker Johnson. Some Democrats have said that they'd be open to protecting Johnson, but they want some conditions associated with that. Where do you stand in this conversation?
You know, Speaker Jeffries talked about this when it was Leader Jeffries, get ahead of myself. Leader Jeffries talked about this when it was Speaker McCarthy. It's premature to talk about this, but there's always room for discussion, diplomacy, to talk about what's possible. Back then, it was the debt ceiling and funding the government. This could be about those national security bills that are absolutely so important. I don't think you'll see a lot of Democrats dangling the possibility of voting for Speaker Johnson. But if we got everything done we needed to get done to protect our country and our allies, there could be other procedural ways to keep him in power. This is unfortunate. This was the sword of Damocles that Speaker McCarthy put over his head, and now Speaker Johnson has. Speaker McCarthy learned too late that it's a divided government. You're going to have to compromise, and the extremists are going to come after you. If you want to talk, you can move past that. If you don't want to talk with us, you're the Speaker Emeritus.
So if I understand you correctly, are you talking specifically about the Senate bill that's already passed, would have funding for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel? And when you say procedural moves, would you mean maybe you'd be willing to vote to table a motion like that as opposed to outright voting for Johnson as Speaker?
Well, there's a number of ways. You described one. I've heard people talk about having an attendance problem because it's majority of a quorum. At this point in time, we don't need another 3 weeks to a month where we're sitting around looking at the walls while the Republicans try to figure out who's their next speaker. This stuff is extremely important. It's important to our allies, who we are as a country, but to our own national security. So it's imperative we act. It's not my life's ambition to protect Speaker Johnson, but it is my life's ambition that we protect this, and our solemn duty and responsibility to protect our country and our allies and to defend that which all the reasons we fought the Second World War, formed the United Nations, formed NATO, and that's defending Ukraine against Putin's aggression.
All right, so let's talk about the path forward on getting the aid to Ukraine. What's the best option here, especially if Speaker Johnson seems reluctant to put the Senate bill on the floor? Is a discharge petition reasonable? Would you be open to a legislation change that would make the money to Ukraine alone? You know, where are you on all these different proposals?
Sure. I think there's the economic reality that Ukraine is in no position to take on debt. But if we want the legal fiction of calling it a loan and recognizing you're going to have to forgive that in the future, so be it. But look, 15 years here, I've learned that what's the path of least resistance is what's likely to get accomplished. As you said, the Senate's already passed this bill. Do we really want to count on the fact that they would accomplish that again? They had 70 votes on a bipartisan basis. The McGovern discharge petition of the Senate bill already has 191 signatures. And my friend who's trying very hard, and I appreciate it, Mr. Fitzpatrick, has another discharge petition on a bill that doesn't have humanitarian aid, has controversial border provisions, has 16 signatures. So you ask yourself, what's the easiest way to get this done? Get the bill to the president's desk. The pipeline to Ukraine is nearly empty. And as I've learned, being in that part of the world several times since the war started, it takes a while to fill that pipeline. And we see the war turning.
So I understand where you're coming on this. I remain skeptical that Speaker Johnson's actually going to put the Senate bill on the floor based just on what he has said about it. So of those other options, you've got the McGovern discharge petition, the Fitzpatrick discharge petition, or a new piece of legislation that the Speaker introduces with a loan tied to it. Would you consider all three of those? Is there one that you like more than another?
Look, if the only option is another bill, the fact is, if we get to 218 with some brave Republicans, it won't be up to Speaker Johnson to put it on the floor. It'll go past him. It'll get on the floor, and it will pass. If that fails, then we have no choice but a new piece of legislation. And again, they can put any language they want on there to get the dang thing done. It's just critical that it happens. And time's wasting. I do think it gets harder to pass those bills as time goes on. And I do think it gets particularly harder to pass them again out of the Senate.
Okay, let's move now and talk about Israel, because there's a lot happening in that space. And last week, Delaware Senator Chris Coons told us that he would support restricting aid to Israel if they went forward with their plans to invade Rafah. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I think everyone supports and appreciates the president's efforts to get the hostages released and a ceasefire. The fact is, some things are not negotiable or shouldn't be. And one is aid getting into the Palestinians. There needs to be a ceasefire. The hostages have to be released. And then long-term, a peace deal that protects Israel's security and provides for a two-state solution. Bibi Netanyahu is not making this easier. Indeed, I see he's pulled back on his plans to visit. I don't know that that's a bad thing, given that the word I heard used about him that's most accurate is somewhat radioactive. Someone who's trying to get help, and I want to help him do that. And he doesn't make it easier by publicly criticizing the president and many of us.
So let's talk about the political impact of this situation, though. And I want to show you two CNN polls right now that show a tied race in Pennsylvania for president, and President Biden trailing President Trump in Michigan. I know you know politics, Congressman Quigley. Is the situation in Gaza the reason that those two battleground states show such divergent numbers?
You know, I think there's a real reason for it within a significant part of the polling population, and I understand that, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it would also help the president in that vein if he would accomplish this diplomatically. Any success there is going to be done diplomatically. So those efforts to get a ceasefire for, if only 6 weeks, to provide humanitarian aid and build on the possibility of a long-term peace deal with those insurance guarantees for Israel coming from the nearby Arab countries. That's really the long-term solution here. Let me just say this. It's also the smart thing to do, because in the final analysis, Hamas is much more than a military organization. It's a movement. And the manner in which Israel has conducted this war is a recruiting tool for Hamas. So they're really not accomplishing what they want to do. Right. If the destruction occurs at the level it has so far. They need to be much more surgical and tactical.
All right, Congressman Mike Quigley, we covered a lot. I appreciate it, sir. Enjoy the rest of your recess. We'll see you when you get back here to Washington.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.